when I taught biology. All right, so sponges belong to phylum Porifera. And as we saw in the video and in the pictures here, they come in different sizes and shapes. They are the simplest creatures on the planet. That's an example of one. When you first glance at it, it doesn't really look like a sponge. When I first saw this picture, I thought, that kind of looks like an octopus. But it isn't. So, how are they classified? They belong to kingdom Animalia because they cannot produce their own food. They have a subkingdom, which we don't really talk about subkingdoms, but they belong to phylum Porifera, meaning that they have holes in them. You may have heard of the term osteoporosis, which literally means holy bones. Well, these are holy creatures. And that is holy with a W, not an H. Well, I guess it could be holy. I don't know. All right, so what do we need to know about these things? Simplest of all animals, they contain specialized cells, but they don't evolve. Well, I don't want to say evolve. They don't have any tissues or muscles, blood. They're just cells. Most of them are marine, which means they live in salt water. We do have a few that live in freshwater, and they can be very brightly colored, as you can see this red one right here. This one kind of looks like algae's covering it. They can be 2 meters to 2 centimeters. I read an article last semester where they found a barrel sponge that was the size of a tractor trailer truck, which means it's probably been there a long time. It also means that nothing eats it. All right, characteristics. Porifera means pore bearing, so they have holes in them. Water enters through pores, bringing in food and oxygen. They are filter feeders. They eat plankton, anything that happens to float by. As we saw with the dye that he used, we saw how the sponges could take in the water with the dye in it and then push it right back out. I've never seen that before, so that's why I showed it today. I thought it was really cool. They have a large opening at the top. It's called the osculum. It's similar to your mouth, which is why it has that name, osculum, because the muscles around your mouth function very similarly to the osculum of a sponge. Excess water leaves. That's also how waste leaves. So the way it comes in, water comes in. We have spicules. We have in-current pores, which means it's bringing water in through the sides. Incoming water on all sides. And then what isn't needed is pumped right back out, along with any waste products. So just like us, they have to be able to exchange gases. So we breathe in oxygen. We exhale carbon dioxide. They have to do the same thing. They bring in oxygen from the ocean. They have to exhale gases that they can't use, just like we do. So even though they are a very simple animal, we have similarities to them. So water in the sides, waste goes out the top. This is another real pretty sponge. At first glance, I thought it was a coral. It kind of looks like it, but it isn't. So this is just them showing you, here's the osculum. You have the choanocytes, which help bring in the plankton. You have something similar in your throat called cilia that helps trap material so it doesn't go down into your lungs. Then here's a freshwater sponge. You don't find them very often, but they are very simple, just like the ones that live in the ocean. And usually freshwater sponges are not as pretty. All right. All right, so the first set of characteristics, they are asymmetrical, which means there isn't always a rhyme or a reason to how they're designed. You have a specific type of symmetry called bilateral symmetry, which means you have two sides. You have a left and a right side. Sponges don't. They can be kind of big lumps. They can be columns. They just don't have one specific body plan. When they're adults, they're what we call sessile, means they are anchored to something, a rock, a coral, the sand. Before they become adults, their larvae, after the egg cells are fertilized by the sperm cells, their larvae will swim for a while until they drift into a place where they can attach to something and be sessile. You can also break pieces off of sponges, and in fact, that's part of one of the things that they do in the commercial industry now. Instead of harvesting a whole sponge, they will harvest part of it, leave the rest there, and that way it can still reproduce, and you're not wasting as many sponges, because as we saw, the sea turtles feed off of them, so you don't want to take away all the sea turtles' food. All right, inside of a sponge is hollow, which is interesting because you are too. Between here and here, you are also hollow. So as I said, they may be simple creatures, but we can still find commonalities between us and them. They have a layer called the spongiceal, which means they have a squishy body. They have an outer epidermis and an inner endoderm. You do too. Okay, this is your epidermis. And underneath there, those layers, you also have an endoderm. You have one that lines your body cavity, that holds your heart, your lungs, your stomach, your diaphragm, all of those things. So as I said, it's very interesting how, we're on the same planet, so we can still find those common things. They have a jelly-like material between their cell layers called a mesenchyme. Probably the closest thing to their mesenchyme that would be us would be kind of our adipose tissue. Theirs is very thin, where ours is divided up. There's different types of adipose tissue that we have. Some of it good, some of it not so much. This is just a really good example of what they've done is they've taken a choanocyte out, the collar cell, made it bigger. Notice how they also produce mucus just like we do. The reason for them producing mucus is the same reason we do. It's to trap particles so they can get rid of them. We produce it, especially in the springtime. If you have pollen allergies, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You sneeze a lot, your eyes might water, you might cough. In the middle of the pandemic, you sneeze in public and people look at you, oh my gosh, you got COVID. No, you just have allergies. So I think it's interesting how you've got this simple 2-cell layer creature that still has to produce mucus to get rid of things that shouldn't be there. And then you have us, a very complex creature, and we do the same thing. So the choanocytes line the gastrovascular cavity and capture food. They are, as I said, very similar to the cilia you have in your trachea. The amoebocytes are responsible for digesting and distributing food. Probably the closest thing to a human and the amoebocytes are the cells that line our stomachs and small intestines. All right, specialized cells, choanocytes, also called collar cells, and you can kind of see why. They look like a vase or like a collar. It's thick on the bottom and has kind of a straight structure at the top. Lines the inside of the body cavity. They have a flagellum. It's like a tail. that help spin water in and bring in food. Collar cells will also trap plankton from the water. All right. Other specialized cells, you have the amoebocytes. They pick up food and they finish the digestion. They move through the mesenchyme and take food into their cells. We have to do the same thing. Whenever we eat food, we don't have any cells in our body that can accept a pizza. Okay? We don't have any cells in our body that can accept a cheeseburger. Right? We can eat those things, but they have to be broken down. They have to be absorbed in order to be used in the cells. So we're not that different from them. Here's an example of a tube sponge, just showing you the organization of it, over and over again, showing you the amoebocytes, the porocytes, the spicule. We have not talked about that. Part of the reason why we don't use a lot of sponges that are real sponges has to do with when you see a sponge, you think it's going to be soft, and it isn't. Spicules are like spikes, and they're very good for helping you remove like dead skin from your body. But as far as bathing with them, they're not exactly the softest thing to bathe with. So that's part of one of the things that they do is they will kind of shave them, shave off the spicules so there aren't as many left. So they can still be used to, I use them on my feet. In the summertime, I wear sandals all the time and I get calluses, so that's where I use mine. But as far as just to bathe with, they can be kind of rough to the skin. Good to wash dishes with, but not so much to bathe with. So just think of a spicule as something spiky like a cactus needle. All right. So for lack of a better term, we say that they have a skeleton. I don't want you to think of that skeleton as your skeleton, okay? We're made up of bone. They're not. But they still have a structure that supports them. They have what are called protein fibers called spongin. And what we're going to find as we go through the course of our phyla is we're going to find that protein is a very, very important chemical molecule to make up life. We can't even live without protein. And I don't mean the food that we eat. I mean the things that build, grow, and repair us. If we don't have a way to make protein to do so, we can't do any of those things. Spicules, hard, spear, star-shaped structures. They are made of what we call calcium carbonate, which what's interesting is so are we. That's what our bones are made of. And then they also have silica. That's that glass. That's the reason why sponges are kind of pokey and not necessarily the softest thing to try to take a shower with. This is what they look like under a microscope. So here's the spongin. You can see that it's just lots and lots of protein fibers that are interwoven. And we see that a lot with protein. It's interwoven. Then we have, here's the spicules. They look kind of like, I don't know. They always kind of reminded me of a shark tooth or something. They're just really like dynamically, I don't know. The words are not coming to me. But when you look at them, those spikes, they look kind of mean. They look like they could hurt. These are limestone, which means that the calcium carbonate it became bound to the silica and it hardened them even more. Here's another good micrograph of a spicule. This one's called a Venus flower basket. I don't even know where those live, to be honest with you. But those are it's kind of neat looking. All right, so how do they reproduce? Well, they can reproduce either sexually or asexually. Asexually, you can do this by fragmenting them, so cutting off pieces of them. And you can kind of plant them. I mean, they're not plants, but you can actually embed them and make a sponge farm. They do that. They can regrow lost body parts through mitotic cell division. This is definitely an area of research for people. Any animal that can regrow, humans are always trying to figure out if we can use that ability to regrow limbs, things like that. Sponges also reproduce by budding. So they can actually like parse themselves off and have like a little bud kind of like off the side or off the top. And when they do that, it kind of looks like a colony. So that's what's happened here. Sponges tend to be hermaphroditic, which means they can produce both egg and sperm cells. They're released into the water. The egg cells are fertilized, swim around until they find a place to be and to live. So this is them being released here, egg and sperm at the same time. We're also going to see that there are creatures that are a little more advanced that can also do this. Now, the reason why sexual reproduction is good for a sponge is it can increase the ability for the offspring to live longer, because it puts variations in the genetic that they have. So if you have sponges that are strong and can withstand diseases, which yes, they do get diseases because they're living things like we are, if they can pass on that resistance to their offspring, then their offspring have a better chance of surviving too. All right, some of them have what are called gemmules, which are specialized buds. Helps them to survive hot and cold water. It's kind of like a pantry, I want to say, because it stores, it has the food, has the amebocytes, so it has the way to absorb the food, and it's also protected by spicules, so something else won't come along and eat it. When a sponge dies, released into the water, it has the ability to resist drying out. The technical term for that is desiccation. And then it can become an adult sponge when conditions are favorable. So it's kind of like taking part of you and freezing it until you can be defrosted and reanimated. Or taking egg cells and freezing them for later. That's what some women who have ovarian cancer, that's what they do. They harvest their eggs and they freeze them until their cancer treatment is completed, and if they can have the go-ahead to be able to have children. So it's kind of an interesting thing that sponges have that ability to realize, hey, I'm dying, here's my genetic information and some food, sending it off. And as that says, it's just a branching tube sponge. I think it's pretty. It's purple. You've got some other creatures around. You've got some coral, some other sponges. Stovepipe sponge. Those are probably the ones I think of most when I think of sponges, or the little round fat ones. Vase sponge. And the vase sponges, for me, without getting a good look at them at first, when I see them, they look like a coral. Barrel sponge, those are the ones I was telling you about that can be as big as a tractor trailer truck. Ball sponges, I also think of those. Rope sponges. This one kind of looks like a forest. I can't remember what that one's called. Maybe she told us. Nope, she didn't.
That looks like those little creatures, like, what's it called?
Jellyfish?
Yeah, it's like jellyfish.
Yeah, it does very much look like a jellyfish. And so next week, we're going to talk about jellyfish and how they're similar to sponges. They belong to a new group, but yeah, there are some similarities between the two. I think that's it. Any questions? No questions? All right, so I'm going to give you the coloring. In your Google Classroom, you have this slide presentation, you have the learning targets, and you have the video that I showed at the beginning of class. So if you need to review anything, it is there. But I'm going to go ahead and give you the coloring sheet. For those of you who are here, you can work on it. And then when you're done, you can just take a picture of it and upload it. And that way you can keep it